anti-U.S. empire. I think that the ruling elite find that kind of scary. These assholes are the faces of disinformation. Suppression and censorship is one of the things I'll be talking about right now. This is coming from Mint Press, one of my favorite people, Alan McLeod. I've had him on the show multiple times. He wrote an article about how USAID, which is one of these, CIA cutouts, it's a U.S. quote-unquote aid agency headed by Samantha Power. Yeah, sometimes they will send aid somewhere, but it's almost exclusively to help further U.S. imperial aims to create revolutions, to create coups, to bring down democratically elected leaders. That's what USAID is. He says a report from USAID outlines how the government agency has been encouraging governments, tech platforms, establishment media outlets, and advertisers to work together to censor huge swaths of the internet. This is this ongoing, quote unquote, battle against disinformation. But what does the U.S., just think to yourself, what does the U.S. empire call disinformation? Guess what? It calls anything that doesn't agree with the U.S. empire is, quote unquote, disinformation, right? Anything that was questioning Russiagate, which we've seen completely collapse, was disinformation. So for years, as they were furthering this drip, drip, drip bullshit of Russiagate, and I hate Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean Russiagate was true. As they were furthering that, I was called disinformation every day, right? I was put on lists. There were articles written about me and others as the agents of disinformation. I was on the cover of the New York Times arts section as they wrote an article about me and all of my evil disinformation. He questions Russiagate. What? How could he? Oh, what a terrible little so-and-so. He's questioning Russiagate. He questions whether the U.S. should create coups around the world. He questions whether the U.S. should drop something like 20 to 40,000 bombs a year. Ugh, the worst. Outlines how the government agency has been encouraging governments, tech platforms, establishment media outlets, and advertisers to work together to censor huge swaths of the internet. The 97-page disinformation primer purports to be fighting fake news. However, much of the organization's focus appears to be on preventing individuals from finding information online that challenges official narratives and leads to increased questioning of the system more generally. You can see why outlets like Mint Press have been so thoroughly suppressed. Their stuff cannot be seen. If you share it, it's shown to like a tiny number of people. And of course, I've faced that as well. The document calls for regulating video games and online message boards, steering individuals away from alternative media and back towards more elite-friendly sites, and for governments to work with advertisers to cripple organizations that refuse to toe official lines financially. Furthermore, it highlights government-backed fact-checking groups like Bellingcat, Graphica, and Atlantic Council as the leaders of fighting disinformation. These assholes are the faces of disinformation. Atlantic Council is a U.S. government group think tank that tries to suppress anything that is anti-U.S. government or anti-U.S. empire. That is their job. Bellingcat is a so-called investigative news outlet that basically just puts out documentation on how Russia tried to poison somebody. But for some odd reason, this elite Russian squad of poisoning goons we're told about, there's been whole CBS reports on the elite Russian poisoners, and for some reason, they can just never actually kill anyone. Have you ever noticed that? They just go in and they just poison somebody that's a Russian enemy just enough to make them really sick and unhappy. It's just an unhappy poisoner. And they, the Skripal poisoning, the Navalny poisoning, they just, and this is not to say, Navalny wasn't an enemy of the state. He also was a neo-Nazi, but he was an enemy of the Russian state. He was put in prison. He did die in prison, although even Ukrainian intelligence says he legit died from, was it heart trouble or something? So you'd think they'd want to believe that he was assassinated, but they said he wasn't. For some odd reason, Russia and all these they always poison people with a poison that can be carefully discovered and points to Russia and never kills the person. Have you noticed that? Just every time. It's like if they were stabbing someone with a Russian flag to try and assassinate them, but it never really stabbed anywhere important. They just like stab them in the leg with a Russian flag and run off, and everybody would be like, I think the Russians did this. Interesting note about the elite Russian poisoning squad. But I just wanted to bring you one other thing in this article. I think a lot of it you're kind of like, yeah, this is how bad it's gotten. It's good to see the actual proof, the actual receipts. Just wanted to bring you this paragraph. The USAID document also warns that satire can be a major source of misinformation. While this is potentially true, the past decade has seen notable satirists that critique power and the status quo, such as leecamp, chased off multiple platforms, suggesting that certain types of satire might pique the ire of censors far more than others. Yeah, I've heard of that guy. He's been censored and suppressed a lot. I think they kind of find comedy scary. I know that a lot of what I do on these live streams is not comedy, so there's that fact. But obviously, Redacted Tonight, my bigger TV show, was comedy. And I think that the ruling elite find that kind of scary because it's like, oh, well, they can't just say this person's lying. They have to say, oh, his comedy is dangerous. Like, that's what the New York Times cover the arts page article said, is basically like, oh, this comedian is kind of dangerous because he's not pushing U.S. propaganda. Wanted to bring you that important article from Alan McLeod about the ongoing so-called war against disinformation. That is not actually disinformation.